The story begins with Masuji Ono, an elderly artist living in post-war Japan. His home, a traditional Japanese house, stands as a reminder of his once prestigious career. Now retired, Ono spends his days reflecting on his past. He used to paint scenes of Japan's floating world, a term that describes the places where people sought pleasure, like entertainment districts filled with geishas and nightlife. The post-war world around him is changing, and Ono's memories take him back to the time before and during the war, when he believed his art was contributing to Japan's future. As he recalls these years, the setting shifts to a time when Ono's work took on a nationalistic tone. The Japan of the 1930s was filled with rising patriotism, and Ono, seeing himself as part of this movement, began to paint propaganda. His paintings were no longer about the pleasure of the floating world, but about the greatness of Japan's imperial future. He remembers how successful he became, and how his work was embraced by the government. At that time, his art was seen as heroic, and Ono felt proud of the direction he was taking. Moving forward in time, we see Ono's thoughts turning to his family. His youngest daughter, Noriko, is about to get married. The family's traditional home becomes the scene of quiet tension. Ono is worried about how his past actions might affect the marriage negotiations. He wonders if his involvement in war propaganda is now seen as a stain on his family's honor. He begins to reflect on how the world has changed since the war, and how his own actions are now viewed through a different lens. Next, we are taken to the streets of a post-war city. Ono walks through neighborhoods that have been rebuilt, but the scars of the war are still visible. He meets with old acquaintances, including his former student, Kuroda. Kuroda had been one of his most promising pupils, but during the war, Ono betrayed him. Believing Kuroda's art was not aligned with Japan's patriotic ideals, Ono reported him to the authorities. Kuroda was arrested, and his career was destroyed. Now, many years later, Ono tries to apologize, but Kuroda refuses to forgive him. The tension of the scene is heavy with the weight of past mistakes. The next scene is set in Ono's home again, but this time with his family. His daughters and grandson visit him, bringing a sense of normalcy to his life. However, even in these simple family moments, the past creeps in. His grandson, Ichiro, represents the younger generation, more interested in Western culture than the traditional values Ono once upheld. The contrast between Ono's old world and the new generation's interests creates a quiet conflict. Ono tries to bond with his grandson, but the distance between their worlds is clear. In another moment, Ono attends the formal meeting for his daughter Noriko's marriage. The setting is a traditional Japanese tea room, where both families gather to discuss the arrangement. The atmosphere is polite but tense. Ono, trying to ease the situation, makes a confession. He admits that he may have made mistakes with his work during the war, thinking that it would help clear any doubts about his family's reputation. To his surprise, the other family seems unconcerned about his past. The significance he placed on his role as an artist seems irrelevant to them, as the world has moved on. Later, we see Ono reflecting once more, this time on the rooftops of his neighborhood. He looks over the city, thinking about the changes Japan has gone through. The old, proud Japan he once knew is gone, replaced by a new society that doesn't seem to care about the ideals he once held dear. The world has moved on, and Ono feels both guilty and forgotten. His reflections are tinged with regret, but there is also a sense of resignation. He cannot change the past, and the world around him has shifted beyond his control. In the final scene, Ono meets with an old friend, Matsuda, who was once a strong influence on him. They talk about the past, acknowledging that they thought they were doing the right thing by supporting Japan's imperial ambitions. However, they both realize that the consequences of their actions were much darker than they had anticipated. The conversation takes place in a quiet, traditional Japanese garden, a peaceful setting that contrasts with the heavy guilt they both carry. In the end, they accept that they were part of a movement that caused harm, but they also find some comfort in knowing that they acted with good intentions at the time. The novel ends with Ono still grappling with his past, but finding a small measure of peace in the knowledge that he tried to make a difference, even if his actions were flawed. The setting of the story, from traditional homes to post-war streets, reflects the journey Ono takes through his memories and the changes in Japanese society after the war. The novel paints a picture of a man trying to reconcile his personal history with the larger shifts in the world around him.